This week on the Destination Angler.
People should not underestimate the power of the voices of hunters and anglers. They go a long way, especially with our more conservative, political representatives. They respect very deeply this constituency. And so when we speak up, they really listen.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haig. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of the Destination Angler, brought to you by JP Ross Fly Rods, makers of happiness, one rod at a time. Get outside and simply fish. Harvest Hosts, offering exceptional RV camping at 2,500 breweries, wineries, farms, and more nationwide. And by Catch Flow, fly fishing's only artist-crafted fly fishing themed footwear brand. Express your passion off the water and shop today at catchflow.com. Coming up on the Destination Angler, we have tarpon fishing in Everglades National Park with Captain Jason Sullivan for some truly off-the-grid fly fishing adventures. Then we're headed to Newfoundland with David Hartland for some head-shaking, hard-running, tail-walking Atlantic salmon. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode of the Destination Angler on the South Platte River with competition angler Russ Miller, VP of Marketing for Umpqua Feather Merchants. Russ gives us the lowdown from top to bottom on this world-famous fishery and shares the highs and lows of competition angling. You won't want to miss. And be sure to check out the Destination Angler Facebook and Instagram pages where we post pictures of the destinations we cover and the top flies recommended by our experts. All right, so today we have a special edition of the Destination Angler podcast on a very important issue affecting our cold water fisheries. You guessed it, climate change. Like many of you, over the past few years, I've been watching the news and hearing more and more about our climate. No matter where you stand and if it's man-made or natural, it's hard to ignore things seem to be warming up, especially this past summer. 2021 was the hottest summer on record. We saw the worst fire season ever in California. Large reservoirs like Lake Mead has dropped to the lowest levels on record, and the snows on Mount Shasta are completely gone. We're seeing hoot owl restrictions and river shutdowns in many western states, including the largest voluntary fishing closure on the Colorado River. I don't know about you, but I've been reaching for my stream thermometer a whole lot more these past few years. As I began to look into all this, I came across a report on the impact of global warming on trout in the interior West. What caught my attention was that 50% of cutthroat trout habitat will be gone by 2080 if nothing is done. Man, that shocked me. Can you imagine a world where half our cutthroat trout habitat is gone? What in the world is going on? So joining me today to help us understand climate change and the impact on our cold water fisheries is Helen Neville with Trout Unlimited. Helen, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
You bet. Well, can you introduce yourself, tell us what you do there at Trout Unlimited, and give us your title and all that good stuff?
Sure. I am the senior scientist for Trout Unlimited, so oversee science for the organization nationally. I am actually based out of Boise, Idaho, though, where we have a small group of national-based scientists here.
How long have you been with TU?
15 years now. In this position, 3 years. Okay,
wonderful. And how many scientists does TU have on staff?
Well, that's a bit of a complicated question. We have a smaller office here of about 6 of us, and then a person down in Nevada who works on a specific trout called the Lahontan cutthroat trout that's under me. But we also have state-based or regional-based scientists, a steelhead science director up in Washington, a California science director there with people working with him, and Eastern science. And we have a lot of staff across the country with really significant science backgrounds as well, who might be working in programs. But we're building a coalition and a network and starting to collaborate a lot more as a whole. So I think with considering all of those people, we have about 30, but not specifically under science.
I think that's super impressive. That TU is really science-based. And also joining us from Trout Unlimited is Sara Porterfield. Sara, welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah. And can you tell us what you do for TU and what your title is and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I am Water Policy Associate for a Western Water and Habitat Program. And I think the best way to describe my job is connecting federal programs and funding with our on-the-ground projects. I do a range of things under that description, and mostly focus on the Colorado River Basin, but work in the whole of the West.
Okay. And you've got a PhD on something I find super interesting. What is that?
I have a PhD in history on my dissertation research was on the transnational history of the Colorado River Basin. So how the Colorado has historically been connected to rivers around the world through legislation, infrastructure, and recreation.
Who knew you could get a PhD on that? That's pretty cool.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Make it up as I go along.
There you go. Well, I'm super glad you guys are on the show, and my hope that we can debunk fact versus fiction and understand just what, if anything, can be done about our warming waters. And as it turns out, as I've been doing my research, TU is already doing an awful lot. And we'll be sure to post links to the resources that Helen and Sara are going to be covering on our website, so you can always go there to check things out. So let's just start with the very basics here. So can you explain what are greenhouse gases and why do they affect our climate? Maybe that one is for Helen.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty simple concept. They are called greenhouse gases because they function like a greenhouse, where a greenhouse, traps the sun's rays and keeps them within the glass of a greenhouse and warms up that area for plants to grow. Greenhouse gases do the same thing by creating kind of a blanket around the atmosphere that trap warmth on the earth. So, the gases themselves that we talk about are typically carbon dioxide and methane, because they are the carbon source gases that we're putting out with our, largely industrial and agricultural and other emissions. But things like water vapor can also be considered a greenhouse gas because it functions in that same way of heating up the area and trapping heat. You think any of us who've spent a lot of time outdoors certainly have noticed that even without a change in the weather or the underlying temperature, a cloudy night is much warmer in the winter than when those clouds are not there and you get a cold, crisp winter night. It's that same concept.
Right.
And so, it's a pretty simple concept and something that we've understood since about the 1800s. Something you can even replicate yourself by putting carbon dioxide, for instance, in a capped bottle and shining a heat lamp on it and measuring the temperature. You can see how that increases in temperature over a bottle with, just regular air in it, for instance.
Yeah. I was reading Bill Gates's book. I think it's called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. And super interesting that, everybody thinks like cars are the big problem here, but cars only account for about 8% of the total. Manufacturing and electricity generation are by far the two biggest areas. Mm-hmm. So I found that super interesting. Helen, so tell us, are global temperatures rising and how much?
Yep, without a doubt. Greenhouse gas emissions have caused a little over 1 degree Celsius of increase around the world since the mid to late 1800s. That's about almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's an average temperature globally. So it's important to realize that, there are some places of the world that are increasing much more rapidly than that and have, reached several degrees warming.
Okay. And is that what up in the northern climates, like in the North Pole, or where is that?
Yeah, that's one area. Yep. The poles are definitely increasing faster.
Okay. And so how do we know? I mean, how is this discovered that the planet is increasing? How can we be sure? And is there a consensus, from the scientific community that global warming is real? What do you think about that?
Wow. Okay. That's a lot. Well, we know it's increasing because we can measure it, right? We can measure the temperature increases. We are all experiencing and seeing the changes of climate change that come from global warming. We have really accurate temperature and weather and global circulation models and climate models that can capture all of these and really put structure behind what we're understanding about the world's climate. And so, are you asking primarily about how we know that this is human caused or what particular aspect?
That's my next question. Why are we so concerned about 1 or 2 degrees rise in temperatures? And then I guess the big question is, is man contributing to the rise in global temperatures?
Well, let's start with the first. I mean, I know, 1 to 2 degrees rise in temperature doesn't sound like that much, but it's important to recognize these are temperatures that the world hasn't seen for thousands of years. And they are already, the temperature increase that we've seen, which is just slightly over 1 degree Celsius, is already enough to be causing the kind of climate change impacts that we're experiencing daily. So, the goals for our global climate agreements are to keep us below an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that's a science-based target because that is where all of our climate modeling shows that we will hit more extremes even than what we're seeing today. So, the longer warm seasons, shorter cold seasons, more heat waves, and all of these other factors that you talked about in your introduction. So think about what we've experienced just in the last 2 years. This isn't just some future prediction. This is what we are already living. And, even if we stay just below that 1.5 threshold, it will get worse. If we reach 2 degrees Celsius, again, that doesn't sound like that much, but that's a global average. So there are certain areas of the Earth that will be much, much warmer than that. And that's where all of our modeling predicts very extreme experiences. So things that are really going to hit levels beyond tolerance for us in our agriculture, in our overall health, hitting extreme temperatures that humans just simply can't. We're not set up to persist in, and agriculture is not set up to deal with. Fisheries, for instance, they're predicting major changes in those kind of things that really sustain life as we know it. And we're not too far off from getting there, right?
I was going to say a half a degree. I mean, that's a little scary. I mean, we're close to the tipping point here?
Well, I think the most recent information that was put out, for instance, by the International Panel on Climate Change, the reports that they've put out show that we're on track to hit that 1.5 degree target now in the 2030s, which is much, they were earlier saying mid-century, so that's much sooner than we had anticipated. And, that they're modeling these things sort of on a steady increase. But yes, you just mentioned like tipping points. There are definitely potential thresholds that we're already seeing indications of that could really change these things quickly. Like, they're already seeing permafrost melting, the Amazon, which is a huge carbon sink right now. So that forest is critically important for absorbing carbon, is starting to lose that function in some places. We're seeing ice sheets and, glaciers melting at much faster rates than had been predicted. And so these kind of things can cause like thresholds that ocean currents, change dramatically, weather patterns change dramatically, and we can get these real sort of exacerbating, self-perpetuating effects. And, just remember that some parts of the world are already well past these limits.
Right. So it sounds like the pace of change is actually increasing. Is that correct?
I mean, again, I'm not an expert in climatology. This is not my area, but I don't know that it's as much that the pace is increasing as that we have been maybe underestimating the pace. So, I think there have been a lot of, this is a fast-moving science, right? All of the modeling. And so as we improve our modelings and get a better grip on the anticipated or measured effects even, they're updating what they're anticipating to come. So for instance, I think some of the advancements have been made in measuring sea surface temperature. And the thing is that the ocean covers so much of the world that just slight advances in that aspect of the science can make major changes in our predictions of the models. So I think in most cases, it's just really that we're measuring it more accurately and finding that it's happening faster than we had even anticipated earlier.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. This is JP from JP Ross Fly Rods. We're happy to support Steve and sponsor the Destination Angler podcast. Do us a favor and check us out on our website, smallstreamflyfishing.com. JP Ross Fly Rods and Company has been around since 1997. We've made thousands of fly rods with one purpose, helping you get outside and be happy. So check out our line of small stream fly rods like our Muir 7-foot, 5-piece, 3-weight E-glass, our famous Beaver Meadow series of rods starting at 5-foot 2-weight, and don't forget our 6.5-foot 3-weight 4-piece, and now our new Beaver Meadow S-Glass, 6.5, 2-weight, 3-weight, all the way up to 8-foot 5-weight, all in 4-piece. Check us out, please, at smallstreamflyfishing.com. And thanks a lot for listening. We'll see you on the water.
Well, it certainly seems like the West is heating up maybe quicker than the rest of the country. I believe we're in a mega drought out West. Isn't that right?
Yes, yes. The likes of which, hasn't been seen in hundreds and hundreds of years.
Okay. What about the other regions of the country?
Well, you mentioned the West, and you mentioned in your intro, we are seeing out here just massive, massive fires that are larger in their footprint and more intense than what we've experienced in the past. That heat dome that parked over here this summer up in the Pacific Northwest and into Canada, was the likes of something we've never seen before. You mentioned earlier the drying of the Colorado River and all of the reservoirs that provide drinking water for millions of people out in the West. And it's, that's truly a crisis. In this part of the country, the agricultural footprint in California, they're just not able to sustain what their agriculture with water. And at the same time, we're seeing, more hurricanes. There were more named storms than ever had been recorded last year. Insurance claims were the highest on record, and we're seeing these deluge floods in the South. And, so it's odd that we have drought in some areas, even in the same places. We have intense drought during the summer, and then we'll have massive floods in the spring. So it's really happening all across the country.
Yeah, I read that there's been a big decline in brook trout in some areas, or there could be a brook trout in some areas in the Northeast.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gosh, years ago, when I first went to Montana, I had a chance to fish the Madison River like in 1994. And so I looked this up. There were 5 days with water temps over 70 degrees back then. In 2008, there were 34 days. And gosh, when you look across the country, there just seems to be overwhelming evidence that this is happening. Wouldn't you agree?
You saw the headlines of the number of fisheries closures and just river closures, even for all recreational uses in some cases across the West. I saw a report from Montana where they collated their fisheries closures. I think it was from 2015 to 2017 at the time, and they had 74 closures just within those 2 years. And I don't know the data from the last couple of years, but likely that has done nothing but increase from what we saw this summer. Okay.
The key question is man contributing to the global rise in temperatures? And how do we know, and to what extent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and this is really undisputed now. And the recent reporting that has come out this year, particularly from the International Panel on Climate Change, again, really hammers that home. That has been put to rest. Like we talked about earlier, the mechanism behind how greenhouse gases work is actually quite simple, and we've understood it for over a century, so it really shouldn't be a surprise that we're having this effect. And so understanding that mechanism is one way we know. And then, it's largely a matter of measurements, which we're very good at, and modeling, which we're also very good at. So we can measure our emissions. We know that quite accurately, and we know the mechanisms behind how those change temperatures. We can measure other sources of carbon inputs and influence on the global temperatures, and we can model temperature and climate across the world quite accurately. I think any of us should be amazed at how accurate our weather and climate models are today, how much we can tell, within 15 minutes, basically what the weather is going to be in our different areas across the country. And then, they can measure and model those things separately or jointly. So when we model, I say we, again, this is not my field, but when they model global temperature and global climate models, you can look at the things that we're observing today and remove the effects of the human emissions and model that separately. And the key is that, we simply cannot explain the patterns that are being observed today without that human influence.
Interesting.
So that's the key, is that without the human emissions and the human influence, the models just don't fit. The patterns can't be explained only with natural processes. And so, just to make it clear, that's the way we address science generally, right? We measure something, we understand the mechanism of it, so we can create a model or a process for it, and then we evaluate statistically or through simulations how much the factor that we're interested in explains what's happening in these models, right? That's how science works in these kind of realms. So it's very clear that we can attribute this to human-caused climate change.
That makes sense to me. And you were telling me a couple of weeks ago that there's a new field of science called attribution. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a field that's, I think, made huge advances recently. That's been really hammered in the most recent reports and some of the studies that have come out this year. So it's basically in this case, it's the science related to understanding how climate change is intensifying observed weather and climate events like hurricanes or heat waves. Like how much more intense does it make these events, and how much more likely does climate change make these events to occur? So it's been a little bit difficult to do that in the past, but they've been, again, like I said, making really good advances and being able to do it quickly now, which is key because we're getting information about this fairly soon after these events happen, which I think is really important for humans to understand, that we get this information soon, not years later. But so just as a couple recent examples, Hurricane Harvey was several years ago, and it took them a little while to attribute the effect of climate change on that hurricane, but they found that it was 3 times more likely to have occurred with climate change than it would have been to occur naturally. And, like the massive heat waves we had in the Pacific Northwest this summer, just that happened at the end of the summer, have already been studied. And I've seen evidence coming out of those studies that it was attributed to making that heat wave much hotter. I mean, again, we had cities like Portland, Oregon at 116 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that was many degrees hotter than that would have been expected to be normally. And it was apparently 150 times as likely to occur under climate change than without it. So again, these are very, very, like, statistically very unusual events. They're very unlikely to happen under a normal climate, but these are the kinds of things we're experiencing, more and more frequently now.
Right. And then the other data point I thought was super interesting is that only about half of Americans believe that climate change is caused by humans.
Yeah. Yep. I think that those data are really interesting to dig into. You were asking earlier about sort of what the level of science consensus is, and I think that's an important thing to talk about, along with the information on public opinion. And, it's important for people to understand that there is a very, very high degree of science consensus on this issue, that global warming is occurring and that humans are causing it. I think, you see in particular a number of 97% of scientists agree on that. On that fact that global warming is human caused. There's some studies that show a range from, maybe 90 to 100%, but regardless, there is a very high percentage of scientists who agree here. And I think about 55% of Americans understand that scientists agree global warming is happening, but only about 22% of us understand that there's that strong of a scientific consensus around climate change, which is pretty interesting. But I think the number of adults, I looked at the more recent data, and the number of adults who think global warming is happening and is human caused is around 57%.
Okay, 57. Interesting. So it's improving, I guess, if you believe that, if you believe the statistics.
Yeah.
And it's a higher percentage amongst TU members, right?
Yeah, we did a recent poll. So the data that I just mentioned about public opinion is coming off of a Yale climate change communications effort. They have a really nice website with interactive maps, and they do surveys of the public every year. And you can go in and see how that information gets broken out in various ways, like how different states or different counties across the country, what the level of support is for different policies, or how much they agree or believe in climate change, what they think about science. So that's pretty interesting. And TU's done our own surveys, which don't exactly match the Yale questions, but they definitely show that our members are quite concerned. We have about 87% of our members believe climate change is real, and I think it was around 77% are somewhat worried about it.
Oh, that's good to hear.
So it's a big concern among TU memberships. And, we did a survey. I mean, within the survey, we have asked a question about fishing experience, and I think it was about 40% said that they had noticed a definite decline in their fishing experience.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey anglers, do you own an RV? Are you tired of staying at the same old parking lot every time you go on a trip? Yeah, you know the one I'm talking about, the poorly maintained lot where you have to navigate around abandoned shopping carts, potholes, and it's always overcrowded no matter what. Well, Harvest Hosts has a solution. Becoming a Harvest Host member grants you unlimited scenic overnight stays for just $99 a year at over 2,500 locations nationwide, ranging from farms to breweries to museums and more. I mean, imagine relaxing at a gorgeous farm with fresh produce or a brewery with your favorite style of beer. And they offer a 90-day money-back guarantee, so there's nothing to lose. Harvest Host is so confident you love being a member that they are offering our listeners 15% off their membership for life with the code FISH. So head on over to harvesthost.com/join now and enter the code FISH for 15% off. Again, that's harvesthost.com/join-now and enter the code FISH. I did a lot of fishing this summer all over the country, and I tell you what, the conversation in fly shops is often, it's less about what flies are using, and it's more about where can I find some cold water.
Right.
Right. And that's not necessarily a brand new conversation, but I tell you, in the last, 30 years, it's new. Everyone's carrying stream thermometers now, and maybe we should have 30 years ago, but it's sort of mandatory, because A, the fishing's no good when the water's like 68, 70 degrees, and B, you're going to start killing fish. So, you got to find something cold.
Yep.
Anyway, another area I want to ask you about was all the other things that have contributed to, I don't know if trout habitat loss and salmon loss is the right term for it, but I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that have happened in the country that have put a lot of pressure on trout and salmon, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we've done a pretty good job at mucking things up for centuries now in different parts of the country. We've obviously just downright developed a lot of habitat, paved it over, and built housing and commercial areas and turned things into agriculture and all sorts of human footprints that we all know about. We've had a long legacy of mining and forestry, clear cutting, hundreds of years ago, log splash dams that were sent down rivers and just obliterated, the complexity of habitats, diversions, irrigation diversions, pulling water out. We've fragmented habitat. I think something that people don't really understand the impact of maybe enough is that even where we have habitat, there are dams, from the sense of things like the Snake River dams that block the migration of anadromous salmon to smaller dams all across the country for, municipal water and agricultural water, and then road culverts. Like every single paved or dirt road across the country has something under it, either, a bridge or a culvert. And often those culverts were not installed thinking at all about fish or aquatic organisms and how they move. So many, millions of those are barriers to fish migration. And so that means that it chops up the habitat that fish have access to. Their habitat then is smaller in different areas, and they're not able to move to use all the different types of habitat they use throughout their life, right? From specific habitat for spawning and rearing to habitat that they go to avoid predators or to overwinter and grow big. And then, habitat that they need to get away from some of these, increasing now impacts like fires and floods. So and for gene flow, like if they don't have the ability to move among populations, inevitably they start to lose genetic variability. And so there's, even where it doesn't appear like it would be that big of an impact, if the habitat looks okay, but it's fragmented still, that can be a really big impact. And then, I would say another big thing that we've done as humans is introduced non-native species, non-native trout all over the world that then have continued to expand by invasion. And then, all of the mussels and diseases that we've spread around. So lots of ways that we have impacted our world for trout and everything else.
Right. And we've altered streams too, right? When you straighten a stream out, you remove the complexity of that stream, correct?
Right. Yep. You lose that habitat complexity, and then it also loses its function from a hydrological perspective, which Sara certainly can talk about. In a lot of cases, we've removed beaver for one thing, which is actually a big impact across the country that I'm not sure people understand so much, but beaver had a huge impact on the way our systems worked. What we think of as a typical sort of straight or at least a linear stream, we now know it's actually not the way most of our streams were in history. They were in these big sort of wet, meadowy, braided kind of systems before we removed beaver. And then things like grazing can actually cause streams to downcut. So the stream banks get really high, and the stream goes down deeper. It'll cut down to the bedrock, and so it gets removed. The banks get removed from the stream itself, and so you lose that like overflow, the connection between the floodplain and the stream and the water, which is really important for recharging and holding water in a system for longer. So what we've ended up with is these channelized streams that just, shoot the water out in a big torrent of a flood or a big torrent of a spring flow, and then it's gone. And so we're seeing, much lower late summer flows than we would if we had that natural system where the stream was connected to the watershed as a whole, and it just recharges and flows over into, these larger riparian areas.
So recharging meaning like actually sinking into the ground and recharging the aquifers below it.
Recharging into the groundwater, which then gets pushed back up into the stream. Water kind of subsides underground, and then in other places it'll come back up out of a stream and out into a stream. And so that balance gets really disrupted when we have channelized streams, moved them, straightened them, created like a hard surface on the bottom that doesn't let the water percolate like it would normally. So, lots of impacts there.
Okay. And TU is actually doing some work to reestablish beavers in some areas. You mentioned beavers a second ago, correct?
Yep. We are. We have a big program in lots of areas, like in the Upper Columbia system. California, I think, does a little bit of this, either actually reestablishing the animals themselves or using what's called beaver dam analogs, where you can go in and put posts in with some braiding, of like willow and stuff in there to help capture the flow and pond it a little bit so it does that function of what a beaver would do. And then in a lot of cases, we find that when habitat is restored, like I work on Lahontan cutthroat trout down in Nevada, and there was a big long-term effort in a place called Maggie Creek that was pretty well obliterated by grazing over the past century, and the beaver were gone. And the BLM and the landowners there, big efforts to try and restore that system. And they found that they didn't introduce beaver, but once they restored the habitat enough that there was something for the beaver to chew on, they came in and started doing their job and ponding and making dams, and were a huge part of now what is a much, much more natural flow regime and higher water storage in that system, largely because of the beaver.
Isn't that interesting? So I always think when I see a beaver dam, what crosses my mind is it's going to be fun to fish behind it, but also that water's getting warm back there because it's spreading out, catching more sunlight. But you're saying actually beavers are helpful.
Beavers are helpful. Yeah, I think on the whole, I mean, there are instances where certainly they can warm systems up, but I think on the whole, they add a lot of complexity to a system, and they're certainly storing water that comes out colder in other places, so it's complex, but, on the whole, they're a part of this natural ecosystem. Fish evolved with them in most places, right? So
sure.
There've been a lot of questions about whether the beaver dams are barriers to fish, but I think, at least the native fish seem to be pretty good at passing them, at least certain times of the year.
Yeah.
So they add, the overwintering habitat in some cases. Those big ponds can be really good.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like most of the beaver dams I come across have holes in them here and there, so I can imagine fish can get around them.
Right.
Hey anglers, really glad to introduce our new sponsor called Catchflow, fly fishing's one and only artist-crafted fly fishing themed footwear brand. With new product drops each month, Catchflow's large and growing selection of fun, casual, fly fishing themed shoes, flip-flops, and socks are all about helping you express your passion off the water. I just picked up a pair of Catchflow shoes myself, and man, they're pretty cool. And with the holiday shopping season near, Catchflows are the perfect unique gift for the passionate fly angler in your life. Now you can explore and buy at catchflow.com, and when you do, use code DAPOD10 at checkout for 10% off your first order. Oh, and 2% of your purchase goes to support Project Healing Waters and Casting for Recovery. So stop by catchflow.com today and pick up a pair. That's catchflo.com. All right, so Sarah, I guess I wanted to shift gears just a little bit and hear from you on what's going on in the Colorado River Basin, because this whole conversation about what's at stake here, if things continue as they are, we're kind of seeing that play out in the Colorado River, aren't we?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, the Colorado River, I would say right now is in uncharted territory. As Helen mentioned earlier, where the West is in the middle of a mega drought right now. And, there's some discussion about whether we should even call it a drought or if it should be called, as Brad Udall and other climate scientists urge, should be called aridification, right? That it's a longer term drying rather than a drought that we think of as quite short term. Right. Brad Udall's work on this is really fascinating, and you can find his stuff online. Is this a much longer term condition caused by climate change, right, than a drought, which we think of as a shorter one to, I don't know what the scientific. I'm not a scientist, as you have all heard, but a shorter term.
You're a historian.
I am a historian by training, yes. And so what that means for the Colorado River system right now is that we're currently in the driest 21-year period on record in more than 500 years. Many folks are calling this past 2 decades or so the millennium drought, since we've seen flows really decline starting around the year 2000 in the basin.
Yeah.
And what that looks like is the average flow in the river from 2000 to 2020 was averaged 8.62 million acre feet. That number probably doesn't mean a lot to many folks, but let me break that down a little bit. An acre foot it's about the amount of water that would cover a football field in 1 foot of water, 325,851 gallons, about enough water for 2 families of 4-ish for a year. So 8.62 million acre feet, that's been the average flows for the Colorado River Basin over this 20 plus year period, in a system that legally and through infrastructure is built for 15 million acre feet or more, 17 even. So you can see that we've declined. Also, I'm not good at math, but that's almost 50% declines, right?
Right.
Yeah. And this year, the most probable inflow into Lake Powell this year, which is the second largest reservoir in the country, sitting just south of the Utah border in Arizona. And the majority of the runoff from the Colorado River comes from above Lake Powell. The most probable inflow into Powell this year is 3.44 million acre feet. That's 32% of average. So we can really see these declining flows happening in the basin right now.
Yeah, man, that's pretty scary. But folks, hang in there with us, because we are going to get into, that there is hope and there is things that we can do about this. But just to continue to kind of paint this picture a little bit, I watched a presentation by Chris Wood, your CEO, who was talking about the fact that there's 28 native species of trout in the U.S., 3 are extinct, and right now, half occupy less than 25% of their historic habitat. So would you say that already trout are under a lot of pressure? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think 2 things. I mean, yeah, that's a bad situation, right? We have definitely had negative impacts on these fish, and a lot of them are in real serious situations of concerning losses and decline. On the flip side, I think it's also our opportunity, right? Because we did this. And in a lot of cases, it's from pretty well direct known impacts, grazing or mining or pulling water out of the streams or putting in barriers. And a lot of that is actually, compared to some of these other problems we've been talking about today, is fixable.
Yeah, right.
A lot of this is something that we can address. And it's really interesting because, we've interacted with a fair number of ranchers down in Nevada where we work. And I remember one of them said once, he said, I was on horseback all the time when I was in my 20s, just all over Nevada. And I thought this is what streams look like without any riparian vegetation, with no grass, just kind of obliterated in that down-cut steep banks and like a linear channel. He said, that's just what I assumed was a healthy stream. But now that his family and ranch and others in the area have started to let these systems heal and they see what can be done, how much habitat we can improve, and it's not just better for fish, it's better for for the beaver again, for wildlife. They get monarchs coming back, birds, like sage grouse, like it's healing a whole ecosystem and storing a lot more water. And they're saying makes their cattle operations, more better, like their cows are healthier. And so I think we have a lot of opportunity to just restore this legacy of degradation that we've put around the country.
Yeah.
So to me, that gives hope. And, I'd say another thing about some of those models, or some of those papers you mentioned earlier, a paper that predicted a 50% decline in cutthroat trout. We've done similar work like that out here. There have been other studies that have shown similar things back east. But I think one thing, at least for our work, to emphasize is that those predictions are based on looking at where we see the fish today, and then projecting forward where they're likely to be lost with climate change. So where the habitat will become too warm and unsuitable for them to persist. But I think a really important part of that message is that where we see them today is already tremendously declined, right? Like we're starting from that baseline that I think we have a lot of opportunity to recover and improve the resilience of these fish in the future.
And we're talking about, strains like the Colorado River trout, the greenback cutthroat trout, Gila trout, Lahontan you were talking about. I mean, these are strains that people are going after today, right? In terms of angling.
Yeah, and incredibly unique. I mean, they've now dated cutthroat trout back to almost 10 million years old. That's been a pretty recent update on the understanding of that fish. So we have, we are potentially losing, an amazing heritage in these fish, not only just something that we love to fish for.
Right. Well, Helen, how'd you get interested in all this? I ought to ask you both, you guys fish?
This is Sarah. No, I don't.
No,
I don't either.
okay.
I mean, I do badly when the opportunity presents itself.
Oh, okay.
It's not my go-to passion.
I got you. Well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Actually, I already knew the answer to the question because we talked about this before.
I think it's good. I mean, not everybody fishes. Some of us are
right. I was going to say
into hiking and camping and that kind of stuff.
So it sounds like you've got a love for the outdoors, and I'm just kind of curious, like, where did you grow up and how did you kind of fall in love with the outdoors?
I actually grew up in South Carolina, kind of a rural area in the northwest of South Carolina, but you might notice I don't speak like a Southerner. We moved to New Hampshire when I was 10. But I grew up, I had just a lot of outdoors in my life as a kid, just really free range, and spent every single waking hour outside. So I've just always been really interested in nature. I went to college as a pre-med student and thought I was going to go to medical school. And then ended up shifting because I realized that I was really interested in nature and that there were ways for me to pursue my interest of science, and particularly genetics, kind of in that field. So I did kind of a shift toward this, and went to grad school to pursue this area.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, I grew up in a very different environment. I grew up in Southern California, just north of LA, between LA and Santa Barbara. And I also spent a lot of time outside, but it was mostly with horses. I grew up riding hunter jumpers and spent a lot of time at the barn.
Awesome.
And my parents did not and don't like to sleep outside, but we would take road trips every year to the national parks through the West. And, we'd stay in a hotel, but we'd be outside all day hiking and getting to see, the desert Southwest and up into the mountains and the Rockies. And then I went to school in Oregon in Portland and left the horses behind and discovered backpacking. And I still have them in my life. I volunteer at a horse rescue now, so still a little, they're there a little bit. But I got into working for the college outdoors program at my college, and from there started working for Outward Bound out of Utah, and learned how to rowboat, and was in the Colorado River Basin running Lador Canyon, the Yampa River, Desolation on the Green, Cataract on the Colorado. And I'd been a history major in undergrad and had sort of put together my own environmental history major, which looks at the that field looks at the interaction between human and nature. And I decided I wanted to pursue that in my graduate work. And so ended up at CU Boulder, and which is where I live now, here on the Front Range, in our little Boulder bubble, and looked at the transnational history of the Colorado. And then academia was not for me, and found my way to TU. It'll be 2 years of TU, I think, next week.
Okay.
So,
It sounds like you were a student for many years, but you didn't want to stay a student forever, it sounds like. So,
too many years, yes.
too many years,
but,
oh my gosh.
It got me where I am.
All right, Sara, I got to ask you, where you're floating the Green River and the Colorado River and the Yampa, didn't you want to wet a line? I mean, come on.
No, we were, Lador Canyon has from what I know, a lot of good fishing, and we often camp at Jones Hole, Jones Creek, which I have heard is very good fishing. And occasionally a co-instructor or someone I know will disappear up there with, a piece of summer sausage on a stick and catch.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. But no, I like the rapids. That's my focus when I'm out there.
Well, I'm glad you both love the outdoors, and it's great that you're part of TU and all the wonderful work you guys are doing. Thank you so much, making a world a better place for all of us. And speaking of that, let's shift gears and talk about, what in the world can be done about this. I mean, we described some of the human caused problems here. Sounds like some of that can be reversed. Sara, Helen, is there hope?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start off with this from my non-scientist point of view. But Steve, I think the way that you found us was through a blog post that I wrote on the work that TU is doing and has done for a long time, and how that fits into strategies for climate resilience. And in July of this year, a group of conservation NGOs put out a report authored by the firms Martin and McCoy and Culp and Kelly on 10 strategies for climate resilience in the Colorado River Basin. And TU was one of the conservation NGOs, along with American Rivers, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Western Resource Advocates, the Nature Conservancy, Environmental Defense Fund, and the National Audubon Society. And what this report does, it's targeted at the Colorado River Basin. These strategies can be used certainly, of course, outside of the Colorado River Basin. But I think that this report is, for me, it is a beacon of hope and optimism. Because when you hear the climate news, it can feel really depressing, right? And I think it was Brad Udall I heard the other day, said, like, you can't depress anybody into action, right? Right. You have to inspire them into action. And what this report does is lays out 10 strategies that some of them are already in use. They are on a spectrum of like known and practiced to a little bit more theoretical, but we have some experience with them, and not we, TU, but we in kind of the larger Western community necessarily. And it lays out these strategies for building climate resilience. And because we think about supply and demand problems when we're talking about Colorado River issues, but climate change is a threat to both supplies and demands. And what these strategies help us do is take a more holistic look at how to address climate change and the effects of climate change in the basin and beyond.
I see. Okay. Can you tick off a few of these strategies? There's 10 of them. We might not have time for all 10, but give us a few, maybe a couple that might be well known, and maybe some that people might not have thought about.
I can go into a little bit more depth on the ones that TU works on. As an example, I'd say, one that's a little more proven and we've known about, again, the larger Western community, and have done for a long time, is upgrading agricultural infrastructure. One that's a little bit more theoretical would be covering reservoirs and canals, to give you an idea of kind of where these sit. And if you're interested in this report, the website is 10strategies.net, and they have a really handy graphic laying out kind of where all these 10 fit on that spectrum of better known to, a little more theoretical.
I'll put that on the show notes on the Destination Angler website too, so people can get that.
Great. Yeah. And so to talk more specifically about a couple, I'll go back to the upgrading agricultural infrastructure and operations. So this, for example, could look like lining or piping a canal or a ditch, right? If you look at a lot of the irrigation infrastructure in the West, they're often, they could be even hand dug ditches or canals that have been around for 100+ years, maybe longer. Here in the West. And if you hand dig a ditch, right, and you run water through it, you can't have water seep into the soil, right? So the amount of water that is diverted to irrigate a field through a ditch like that, often you're diverting, or you will be diverting more water than you're using consumptively or that is used up in irrigating that field, right? So one way to make those operations more efficient, and this is not, this is very situation dependent. Sometimes this is really appropriate for an area, and sometimes it's less appropriate to do something like this. But you can take that ditch or canal and line it either with, concrete or plastic so that you reduce that seepage and that system loss as the water's carried through the system. Or you can put it in a pipe and pressurize it. And the way that doing these kinds of projects can help overall basin-wide water security is that, you're not changing necessarily the amount of water that's been historically consumptively used, but you are changing, or you can be changing the amount of water that's diverted. So that amount of water that's, diverted but not consumed, that can be dedicated to an in-stream use, right? So that can help increase in-stream flows, which can help with temperature in my non-scientific understanding. It can help with temperature issues in a stream, and it can contribute to greater basin-wide water security because you're making it a better, there's benefits for the ecosystem, there's benefits for the agricultural producers who have a more efficient system now, right? There can be benefits for all the users in the system because that, historically diverted but not consumed water is staying in the system to benefit that whole watershed, whatever scale that may be at.
Gotcha.
And then to talk about one other one, just to go touch back on what Helen was saying about beavers, natural distributed storage. This is restoring those highly degraded natural meadow systems, as Helen was talking about, that have often been downgraded or beavers have been removed or both. And this can improve local aquifer recharge, water retention, reconnect floodplains, and support productive meadows and riparian ecosystems. So as Helen was talking about with the beavers earlier, right, you have that retention of water higher up in the system, the recharge of shallow aquifers that can have benefits, and it's place dependent, but can have benefits for stream flow, for water temperature, et cetera.
Sure.
And that again helps that, climate resiliency for the whole basin, for the whole West. And those areas that are those, kind of re-wetted meadows can often have benefits for both acting as fire breaks because they're a wet, wet area in the middle of a drier system. They often act as fire breaks. And they also have benefits. We have a project in the Miller Creek drainage in Utah that's putting in BDAs. And there's a bunch of them in there. I wrote about this in the
What's a
blog post,
BDA?
which we can link to.
The
beaver dam analog.
analog.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, those kind of, faux beaver dams. No beavers involved, beaver dams.
Gotcha. Human-built beaver dams.
Yes, yeah. And using those in a previously burned area to help catch sediment and slow down water. So you have benefits for water quality downstream, among other benefits as well.
Oh, cool. Okay. Helen, what do you think?
Well, that is also amazing. Sara works in a sort of realm of all of this that's different than what I work in, but that all falls under this sort of like adaptation aspect of helping communities be more resilient, helping our agriculture be more resilient, pulling less water, helping watersheds and ecosystems be more resilient. So that aligns with a lot of the restoration work we do. In some cases more focused on like the fish, but restoring their habitat and again, reconnecting them so they can function better in a system and just be more resilient to this change. And then there are two other sides that we work in as well that are the other important prongs of dealing with climate change, which is the sequestration. So storing carbon in systems. So, this is something we're just starting to get into, but, tree plantings, for instance, restoring riparian vegetation. It's interesting you plant tens of thousands of trees across the country annually, but we've never actually collected the data from our members and even our staff on exactly how many of them we do and where. And measured, in this case, how much carbon they're predicted to store. So that's something we're starting to get into is getting that information from our volunteers and staff and thinking about how our efforts help there. And I think, generally when you're restoring a system back to its natural functioning condition, it typically, there's some, complexities to this in some cases, but typically will store more carbon. So we're also supporting, the national efforts around things like the 30 by 30 or America the Beautiful, which is this is a global science-driven goal to protect 30% by 2030, 30% of our global and United States lands and waters by 2030, for the sake of, carbon storage is a part of it, is the footprint of the lands that we're preserving, but also these functional intact ecosystems, which generally store more carbon because they're functioning better. So that's a goal. And then it's, actually the goal is 50% of our lands and waters by 2050. So that's something we're supporting. And then, I would just say, I think it's super important to emphasize, because I just don't know that the general public understands this, but we are at a real timely and almost frightening point of needing to reduce emissions. I mean, we simply have to reduce our emissions. And the latest science that has come out this year is a real wake-up call on that front. Like I said, this is all proceeding and progressing faster than they had even anticipated, that we're supposed to be hitting some of these threshold points by, in the 2030s. That's within a decade, or, a little more than a decade, depending on where it falls in that. But we have to take some very serious and fast action on reducing our emissions. So, we're supporting some national legislation as one approach to this, for carbon dividends, carbon fees and dividends that's being proposed. This is critical timing right now in the next, couple weeks, months, at a national level for how we'll handle this. But I can't, as a scientist, I can't emphasize that enough, how important that is.
Right. And one of the things I love about TU is you guys make it so easy to write your congressman. I've done that several times.
Right.
I get an email from TU, explains what the situation is. And there was one on some legislation you guys are pushing, I guess, in Washington. And it was literally 3 minutes, and I had written a note to my congressman, and you know what? They get them too. I got an email back. At least I got an autoresponder back. But, hopefully enough people do it that they pay attention.
Yeah, that's an interesting other point. I think that's something that's really important to emphasize, is that people should not underestimate the power of the voices of hunters and anglers. They go a long way, especially with our more conservative, political representatives. They respect very deeply this constituency. And so when we speak up, they really listen. And it was interesting. We have at TU, a National Climate Change Working Group. So it's our grassroots member-led part of our National Leadership Council. It's one of our major focuses of conservation. And one of the members of that working group said recently, I think he's from Oregon, and he asked one of his constituents, how many people do you need to hear from on an issue to really kind of change your opinion? And the person said 100 people.
Oh, really?
He said, if I hear from 100 people about an issue, somewhere around there, that's enough to make me realize that this is a critically important issue. And that's not many, right? Like, that's something we can all think about from a personal level or a, sort of group level. It really matters that we all speak up. So yeah, I'm glad you pointed to our stand-up sites on our website to take action on these things. There's one that just went up on climate change.
Okay, so that's easy to do. And I was listening to your president, your CEO, talk about your Priority Waters program that touches something like 2,000 streams. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's an effort that we're undertaking under our strategic plan. They're not developed yet, but this is a focus in our new strategic plan to try and identify areas around the country. We're doing this in every state where we have trout resources, and working with other states where we don't. But to design a footprint of where TU will be focusing our efforts in the future, with the idea that we can align not only our work, but hopefully the work of the priorities of partners like the Forest Service and other communities to come with us to help restore these areas. Like if we put all of our efforts into these places, the TU can really make some impactful change. So that's a process we're just starting. But I think it's for the first time that we've really focused our efforts not only on what we do. We have this protect, restore, sustain model that we is sort of the bread and butter of our restoration work. Protect, reconnect, restore, and sustain. But this is the first time that we've really asked where we should be doing it and why. And so that's an exciting time for TU to be focusing in that realm.
Right. And if you're tapping into the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Services, they've got some money too, right?
Yeah. I mean, they're some of our biggest supporters, right? And hopefully vice versa. I mean, hopefully the idea from this is that we can come up with shared agendas, and areas where we can agree on things that can really change, move the needle for trout and salmon and communities, in these broader realms like Sara works in.
So folks, Helen's got a really great presentation online. I think we can get you a link so you guys can watch this. But in that presentation, Helen talks about, and Helen, maybe you can jump in here. You talk about a stream that you guys were able to restore by reducing the surface area, you said, and added some trees for shading and created a better connection to the water table. And then the change was a 6-degree drop in water temperatures. 6 degrees is a lot. That's fantastic.
Great. Yeah. Reconnecting these streams. And in some cases, we haven't monitored nearly as deeply or broadly as we should in some instances, but where we have, or where our partners have, you can find some real dramatic changes and just restoring the function of a system again, repairing that riparian vegetation for shading and then restoring that function that Sara and I talked about to reconnect the stream to the groundwater and its floodplain. That does tremendous things in terms of decreasing stream temperatures and increasing flows, sustaining them for longer throughout the hot summers.
Right.
So super important work.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, we do, I'll just say real quick, we do these projects in all ranges from like the big yellow machines that go out and actually like re-meander a stream to riparian vegetation plantings to beaver work or beaver dam analogs to, there's this whole gamut of continuum there for natural solutions like Sara was talking about. And there's this whole new field of restoration called stage 0 or natural process based restoration, where the idea is really not to just go in and like design a stream, but to go in and restore that watershed function. So you may not be, it's not as prescriptive, right? You're just trying to let the stream do what it will do naturally. And so it's, that's a real fast emerging field. But it's all really exciting, I think, to be moving in those directions.
Well, the example you gave of the rancher somewhere out west, forget where it was, but who
Nevada.
said, hey, this in Nevada, this is actually helping his cattle ranching operation. So, if more people kind of, understood that this doesn't have to be bad for business, this is actually good for business in a lot of ways, maybe we get more people on board.
Right.
Yeah.
Certainly good for fishing.
And good for fishing. You bet. So if you were to give us some, I don't know if tips is the right word, but what can an angler do? Like here I am sitting in my house in Indianapolis, Indiana. What can I do here? Should I focus on my home waters? Is there, I can write my congressman. We talked about that, but how can I get involved? What can I do?
Yes and yes and yes. I mean, I think, all of us can, of course, reduce our own climate footprints, changing the way we eat, how much we drive, our energy sources in our home. And, cumulatively that will go a long way, but we really need this national level policy and large scale approaches. So, but I think a key is what we all can do is talk to each other. I mean, the more, we're so divided in this country now, but when we talk to each other about the things that we care about and what we're observing and that we care about a future for our children and our grandchildren, I think just we can influence other people that way. And I don't think we should underestimate the power of that. The information that we talked about earlier in terms of how much of the public doesn't really understand the degree to which scientists, fully agree on these issues. That's a huge education opportunity there for us to really inform people in our own living rooms about it, or go talk to your representative, invite them out fishing, align with our local chapters across the country, or get on our website. We've got a lot of resources on there where you can take action like you talked about. We're again aligning in some of this policy work with a group called Citizens Climate Lobby, and they have local chapters too. They're really active. They're very good. They're nonpartisan. They're like, they're strong like TU because they're formed around grounding in nonpartisan work toward climate change. And so, get involved with groups like that. I think there's a lot we all can do. And a lot of it's really raising awareness because really, honestly, we're at a pretty pivotal time right now.
Yeah, I tell you, they're tough conversations to have. I can't tell you, as I was getting ready for the show, I've talked to a lot of people about climate change, and it's a tough conversation sometimes. People don't want to hear it. A lot of people just will throw something out that they heard somewhere, and
Right.
That's it. They're just not interested in really looking into it. And it's probably true for a lot of different subjects. So, what have you found, Helen and Sara, as you're, socializing, talking about this? Like, what works? Like, what's the approach for people?
I think, again, talking about that common ground, sort of thinking about talking from the heart and where people can connect on something they can agree on, whether you agree that it's human caused or not. We really do need to get there to that level of understanding, I think, but just talking about what you're observing, right? Like, everybody is seeing this. And, I think it's like the ag industry and some of these groups that are seeing it every day, and they're seeing the writing on the wall for how this is impacting them. And so all of us have connections to these kind of things. How much smoke have we had this year? Like, how many days of smoke have we all endured this year compared to what you remember 30 years ago?
Right.
What's thinking about it from the things that we all care about in terms of our children, what your experiences in fishing. I think one of the effective things that climate change working group that I talked about, the grassroots effort at TU has been doing, is we've been crafting a series of blogs from the voices of our members, because I'm like, this isn't going to be impactful coming from me or, our government affairs folks. What really matters is hearing it from you all, like hearing your experiences. And so I just think the more we can talk about it, guides are obviously really getting involved in this. They're seeing it, they're talking about it. So, it's critically important.
There definitely is. There are people that are very, very concerned about this.
Sara works with people on the ground, in a totally different context than I do. So I'm sure she has other ideas as well.
Yeah.
I would imagine the key to a lot of the work that you do is it helps us all when we do these things, right? Climate change or no climate change, if we improve resilience, if we improve efficiency, if we improve habitat, that's actually good for everybody, right?
Yeah, exactly. That there's, none of this has to be win-lose, and we can find by working in these collaborative groups and situations, we can find these win-win-win solutions. And the Colorado River Basin gets a lot of press, rightly so, for being a very collaborative watershed. You can see this through a series of policy decisions that guide river operations, starting in response to the start of the millennium drought with the 2007 interim guidelines and the 2019 drought contingency plan. And that's a whole other story. But we're coming up on renegotiating this management framework. And we don't know exactly what this process looks like yet, but we have this history of being collaborative, and we're using that moving forward and being increasingly inclusive. For example, tribes have been historically left out of decision making for pretty much everything, but specifically in this instance for river water management decisions for 150 plus years, and they're pushing to be and should be at the table. And when we have more diverse and inclusive participation, we have a lot more creative and forward-thinking solutions that benefit everyone. And I think too, what is, Helen, and what you're saying that is a little bit implicit in that, I just want to make it explicit. And this is, the case for some of the research that's gone into what works for communicating climate change, is that these are places that are really important to us. We all have that special place, whether it's the wetlands that are across the street from me in this patch of open space that's owned by CU Boulder, that I can watch change over a season. Or I was just on Cataract Canyon on the Colorado River last week, somewhere that I've spent a lot of time boating, and it's far away. But I think we all have these really special places. And, exactly what you're saying, Helen, is that, and Steve, that we've all seen these changes happen in our own lives and in places that are really important and meaningful for us. And I think that kind of sense of place and that way to connect to these locations that mean a lot to us emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, is a way to understand what's happening, to communicate that, and to find common ground with people. Like, we all love this river. What can we do about it?
I love that.
Right.
My goodness. And people can also join TU, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Join us in the work we do, right?
Yeah.
Memberships, or just get involved in some of the work we do. We have a lot of supporters who aren't always members, but they are truly helpful to the organization by going out on some of our community science days or helping with riparian plantings or whatever. Of course, we hope people will become members, but there's a lot of options for just supporting groups like TU in the work we do broadly.
For sure. It's the best $40 I spend a year joining TU. I love sending you guys that money. It's going to a good cause. Well, listen, Sara and Helen, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you so much for doing this.
We really appreciate it. I mean, there's no more important issue in my mind. And so really glad that you're connecting on this and reaching out and getting this in front of people. So thank you. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you. And hey, I wish you extraordinary success in all your efforts to solve these climate challenges for trout and salmon and anglers and all the other people that touch this. And like we've been saying, I'll be sure to post links to the resources that were mentioned on my website. And we also hope to get some pictures of some of these projects up on our Facebook page and Instagram page at Destination Angler. And folks, thank you for listening, really. And thanks for taking time to educate yourself a little bit on this very important issue for our time. This is about the future of trout and salmon, and it depends on all of us to get up to speed on the facts and take some action, right? We want to slow the impact of global warming, on your home waters and beyond. So you can DM me or email me with comments or suggestions at sheg50@gmail.com. And hey, if you like the show, tag a buddy. Let them know about it. Tight lines, everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.